Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Device, where we explore the life-defining moments that shape careers within the medical device industry. We are particularly interested in understanding how personal experiences, challenges, or pivotal events influence professional journeys. As we progress through the conversation, we will land on the question, what is the one defining moment or experience in your life that changed everything and set you on the path that you're on today? Today's guest is Elizabeth Blake, Managing Director of Apple Orchard Marketing. Elizabeth started her career in clinical healthcare before moving into the commercial side of the industry, going on to build a 30-year career across pharmaceuticals, orthopedics, and MedTech marketing. She's worked with both global organizations and early-stage companies, helping them position, communicate, and take products to market. She now supports businesses at a critical stage where they need to define their story and connect with the right audience. Many of you connected with Elizabeth will know that she was involved in a life-changing cycling accident in 2024, resulting in multiple serious injuries. Since then, her perspective on success, progress, and resilience has shifted significantly, and that's a big part of what we'll explore in this conversation. Elizabeth, welcome to Beyond the Device.
Welcome.
Thanks, Duncan. Nice to be here.
Cool. Well, as we always do, let's start at the start. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a bit of an overview of what your life was like at the earlier years growing up.
Sure, Nathan. So I grew up in Chesterfield in Derbyshire. Two working parents, one younger brother, massively irritating as a child, but we've become good friends as time's gone on. I would say a pretty typical kind of northern upbringing.
Yeah. And as a child, what were your aspirations? Do you see, like, thinking about what you do now? Was that ever on the cards? What were you thinking at such an early age?
Yeah, so not in the form that the path I've taken, it wasn't, Nathan, but I had a congenital dislocated hip when I was born, and it was actually missed at birth. And so my grandmother spotted it as a baby crawling and said, that's not right. And so Mum kept taking me to the doctors saying, this is not right. And they eventually said, look, we'll investigate it, find out, and found out it was completely dislocated. It was out of joint altogether. So I ended up having to have surgery on it. And as a result of that, annual checkups at hospitals. So kind of spent a lot of early years in a medical setting as a patient. And so I always wanted to do something medical. But at that point, I envisaged that being on the clinical side rather than on the commercial side.
Yeah. So yeah, that's probably quite a tough thing as a young kid to have to go through that. How often, for how many years were you going to the hospital?
So I went annually until I was, I think, 17.
Wow.
The actual surgery and everything itself, I think, was a bigger deal for my parents than me, because obviously I was 18 months old. So I don't remember it, but I do hear stories of things like I was the child with the most teddies because my dad couldn't cope with a hospital environment at all. So I certainly didn't get that side from him. And so he would send Mum with teddies because he couldn't cope with being in a hospital setting.
Fair enough. And was there any sort of follow-up procedures, or was it just the one and then just checkups after that?
So it was the one procedure to actually fix it, which involved putting a couple of plates in, and then a second procedure to take those plates out. But after that, it was just annual checkups, and I didn't really think about it at the time. I just got on with life. But actually, when you look back at photographs of me kneeling or anything like that, you can see that hip has always got a reduced range of motion. So I always did things slightly differently. Little did I know how much it was going to come to haunt me when I'd had the bike accident that Duncan referred to. And it makes physio on my left leg very different from physio on my right leg because of that initial deformity.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on it then. Like, at the time, you just get on with it. And I think when something big like that happens, you do just find a way, but it's not until you look back and reflect and think, yeah, that was a big deal. But kids are resilient anyway. And
absolutely. And I think equally parents, that neither of my parents were the kind of parents that mollycoddled you, and it was the moment you could do it and that it was safe for you to do it, get on with it, go do everything as normal. So I kind of grown up with that attitude of get on with it and make the best of it.
Yeah. And just thinking about those earlier years, did you have any role models? Was there, like, it could have been parents, teachers, friends, anyone there that stands out?
I think it's probably is parents, in terms of that, setting you up with their values. They were very strong in their values in terms of workmanship, and also love of the outdoors. Unfortunately, my father died when I was 32. So not a child, but still fairly early, not the kind of thing we expect to happen, and after a short, unexpected illness. So he was a big part in those early years, but obviously not so much latterly, as he's not been around for a big part of my life.
And what would you say is the standout lesson that you've taken from him?
Poor. Probably that attitude of get up and get on with it.
Serving you well in recent years.
In so many ways, Duncan, that you, as you say, at the time you didn't expect it to. But yeah, definitely served me well.
Yeah. So if you were to reflect then on everything to date, personal, professional, there's those chance moments, so many people that we've had on the podcast, like this, the big moments are actually the small ones. But when you reflect on your own journey, talk about defining moments, what stands out to you?
I think there's probably two. One of which I would say is professional, and one of which I would say is more personal. So the professional would be, I went from working corporate and for some of the big multinational orthopaedic companies into startup world. Wished I'd found it years ago, because I absolutely loved that multiple hats, not being confined and constrained by your job. But we had a change of CEO. And with that change of CEO, for me, I felt undervalued, not really allowed to voice my opinion if it was different within an internal setting. Clearly, externally, we need to be of one voice, but internally, didn't feel that, and starting to feel a little bit like I'd done in corporate in terms of pressurised, but not really enjoying what I was doing. And I'd kind of had this thought bubbling in the back of my head about, could I work for myself, run my own marketing consultancy? And so that was the moment that made me say, if there's ever a time to do it, now would be the time to do it. And then obviously the personal big change has been the accident that you referred to. So I got knocked off a road bike, and as a result of that have a spinal cord injury. Various broken bones at the time, but they obviously heal fairly easily. Spinal cord's a little bit trickier to get that to recover. So I think they're probably the two biggest things, I would say.
Okay, well, let's dive into both. So the professional turning point is something that Nathan and I know very well from supporting so many people over the years, transition from permanent into contracting. And 5 years ago, we took our own advice, leaving employment to start Capu Search. And it, after however much planning and thought you want to put into it, it does just become a leap of faith. And so many people would think, wow, I wish I'd have done this sooner. But everyone gets to that point from a different journey. So for you, when you reflect on everything that you've achieved as a consultant now, do you feel like it was the right time, or was it too late? Like, could you have done it sooner?
I don't think I could have done it without being involved in running a startup. I think I needed that experience, definitely, because my kind of focus is startup MedTech companies. So I definitely needed to understand, because there's massive differences from startup world to corporate world. So I think it probably was the right time to do it. And as you say, that leap of faith, literally the sleepless nights of what if this doesn't work? What if I can't get clients? What if I'm not as good as I think I am? And all those things that could so easily have made you go, no, I'm just going to get another job full time for somebody else. But I actually read the book, The 4-Hour Week.
Okay. I've read that.
Yeah, which was, I mean, for me, undoable. There's no way I could have done a 4-hour week. I really don't think I could. But there was a comment in there about, if you try this and it doesn't work, what is the worst thing that happens? And that was the point that made me go, okay, this is worth me trying, because if it doesn't work out, I go back to a full-time job.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't in an industry that meant there was a shortage of those roles or anything like that. And I kind of gave myself 6 months. It's going to take me 6 months before I've got any kind of client at all. So
And
don't panic.
How long ago was this?
Coming up 4 years, Nathan.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, at that time the market was in a very good spot.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of gave myself 6 months to have at least got a client, and then if we can do that, we can take it from there. But actually, it only took me a month before I'd got the first client. Obviously, well known in the sector that I was working in, so that made it much easier to get some initial work. And definitely don't regret it, and would never go back to a full-time role. I occasionally see them come up on LinkedIn for companies that you think look really interesting, but the whole going back to full-time employment for somebody else is definitely not for me.
Yeah, we're all unemployable now. It's actually going to be very relevant, your insights to this, because as Nathan just alluded to there, 4 years ago, market conditions very different. And we talk to people every day now that are either at risk of redundancy or are considering a move. And when you're in a permanent position and maybe you've had thoughts about this for a while, you think, okay, maybe now is the right time. And for some, it still is. I feel like the advice that we're having to give people over the last 12 to 18 months, even longer, is caveated by market conditions. It can be the right time for you personally in terms of responsibilities. You might feel like you've got the right level of experience to know what services you're going to offer. But if market conditions aren't quite there, and then it's competitive with existing consultants and contractors and that network, you know, are you really setting yourself up for success? So some people like they wait until they've secured a project, then hand in their notice. But if they've got a 3-month notice, that's difficult. Nobody's waiting that long for a contractor. That's where that leap of faith comes in. So if someone sat there considering this now, given current market conditions, what sort of advice would you give?
I think it also, not only does market situation affect it, but your own personal situation. So for me, I was that bit older. I didn't have a mortgage. I don't have kids. So if it went wrong and I was then out of work for a little while, there weren't a whole load of people that I was letting down. So I think that made the decision much easier for me to make than what I can imagine that decision would be if you've got, you know, mortgage, kids, all the rest of it. Then, you know, I can imagine that is a harder decision to make. But I think that idea of dipping your toe in the water in some format, whether that is something that you can do as a side hustle or something you can do on a volunteer basis to just give yourself that idea of what it might be like while you've still got the backing of a full-time employment. If you're in that situation, I can imagine that would be a sensible way of doing it. I was fortunate not to have to worry about those things.
Yeah, and again, the advice that we give usually starts with that personal situation, because you need to square that away in your own mind with your partner, like family situation with kids. And if you can't get past that, then you really shouldn't be considering it at that point. And that's why you can have off-the-shelf advice and examples of how it's worked for other people, but it has to be specific to whoever you're speaking to at that time. Okay, so I guess what that has led to, because I want to try and link the two actually, because the freedom that you've got in your current situation with your recovery, but also had you been employed whilst the accident happened, what sort of protections would you have had as an employee? There'll be a conversation there, but just tell us a bit about what actually happened with the cycling accident.
Yeah, so I was trying that year to qualify to represent Great Britain at the World Championships as an age grouper in not triathlon but aquabike, so basically a triathlon without the run. The hip replacement doesn't make my running great, so if I wanted to qualify, the only way of doing it was through aquabike, and I'd competed 2 weeks before the accident. So we had a local triathlon on, a club triathlon that morning. which I would normally have competed in. But because I'd done my last attempt qualify race, I was kind of like, I don't need to put myself under that pressure. Do you know what? I'm not going to compete. But what I will do is I'll cycle down there and I'll see everyone, say hi to them, and then cycle home. Be a 30-mile round trip. That'll be, good morning. Unfortunately, I got 2 miles down the road from home and a horse box turned right into me across my path. I don't remember the accident, but having seen the state of his bonnet, he hit me square on and I bounced off the bonnet, landed on the road. And as a result of that, I'd broken a clavicle, half a dozen ribs, and more importantly, a burst fracture of T12 vertebrae in my spine, which had also damaged my spinal cord. So, taken by hospital to Southmead Hospital in Bristol, and 3 or 4 hours later, operated on. So same day, operate. Spinal cord stitched back together, as the surgeon accurately described it. Stuff everything back in, stitch it together, and hope. And fusion of my spine because of the burst fracture. And I was then in hospital I was in ICU for a week, and I was in hospital in Southmead for 9 weeks. All the time waiting on a bed at Salisbury spinal unit. Unfortunately, we only have 11 spinal units in the UK. I don't know what the exact number of beds at Salisbury is, but I think it's somewhere around about 35, 40, and that is similar to all of them. We have a spinal cord injury in the UK every 2 hours. So there is nowhere near enough capacity for the amount of people who need it. So I came home for a short period of time, then went to Salisbury, but I'd actually already started intensive rehab locally. And Salisbury knew that they couldn't provide the same level of rehab. So I actually only went there for a couple of weeks and then came home and continued the rehab journey as an outpatient with a private rehab facility in Bristol.
And are we coming up to, is it coming up to 2 years since the accident?
Yeah, it'll be 2 years this July.
Yeah, and there's still, having spoken to you in the prep for this, weekly physio, like this has completely changed your routine, your life, and still coming to terms with that routine.
Yeah, I think I say I swapped a full-time job and a training plan for a rehab plan. So at the moment I am doing rehab 3 times a week, and they are 3 hours each session. So that is pretty much 3 days of the week out that I'm not available to do the things I used to do, including work. So it definitely has had an impact. And not only the actual time doing rehab, but the fact that everything takes so much more effort, whether that is physical or mental. I'm sure you guys this morning hopped out of bed, got dressed, clean your teeth, downstairs, job done. It takes me an awful lot longer and a lot more physical effort to do it. And then everything that you do, if you're trying to practice any sort of walking, stepping, anything like that, I have to physically, mentally think about every single step you take. So even if it's not physically tiring, it's mentally exhausting just trying to do day-to-day activities that you do without thinking about it.
So when you were after the week in ICU and you had that 9 weeks in hospital, because you don't remember the event, actually that 9 weeks in hospital, just there, knowing what's happened but not remembering it, like what sort of emotions were you going through at the time?
Outwardly, I was my usual chipper, get on with this attitude. Inwardly and with my close family, I was an absolute wreck. My life was, if it wasn't work, it was sports related and very much around the triathlon. And at that point, my brain's telling me all that's been taken away. So I literally felt as though I'd lost my identity. I couldn't see how I was going to do my job. I travelled all over the world in doing that job, and I can't get out of a hospital on my own. So I'm not going to be able to do that. I clearly can't swim, bike and run like I used to. So it kind of felt like life was over. But I don't kind of show that externally. So I think a lot of people that would visit would be kind of like, yeah, she's doing all right. She's hanging in. And a lot of people said to me, I can't believe how positive you're being about this. But that's the kind of outward face as opposed to how you really feel about it on the inside. Measured with that attitude of, I've just got to get on with this. It's not going to change. So me laying here feeling sorry for myself ain't going to change the situation. So I've got to work out what I can do to try and improve things as much as is physically possible.
And I think when something happens to you or someone close to you, health related, kind of everything else is put into perspective, particularly work, and working for yourself, being self-employed at that time and since, you've had to adapt how you work, how you support your customers. So from that point to just, right, we've just got to accept it and get on with it, deal with the emotions, but to where you are now, like what sort of work capacity do you have in addition to the rehab plan? What does today look like?
Yeah, so in terms of directly after the accident, I actually only took a week completely off work, and that was the week in ICU. Once I was back on the ward, I was trying to do work, probably more so for me mentally, because I'm stuck in a hospital bed. I'm not on massive amounts of meds that take me out of my head. I'm not in a huge amount of pain. I am a very active person, so I am bored, rigid. So what can I do to fill the day? And having some clients that I'd worked with for a number of years who were very good at accepting, I'm not going to be available the way I used to be. We're going to have to do things a little bit differently. And so with their support, managed to keep doing that work. Very difficult to do in hospital. They are not geared up for it at all. So despite a nurse putting a note on the door to say, unless urgent, please do not disturb between 11 and 12, because I'm trying to do a meeting with a client talking about their marketing strategy, and the door would open and somebody would come in and say, I haven't got your meal plan for tomorrow. Do you know what you want? They'd be like, I'm trying to work. You're trying to what? What? Yeah, I really couldn't get the head around it. And that's where I needed those clients that could understand that and accept that. What it's made difficult for me, because I kind of lose 3 days out of the week straight away. And the accident has made me shift focus slightly, that life could be over tomorrow. So we need to make the most of every day we've got, and not, as my father did, I'm going to keep working, I'll keep working. When I retire, we're going to do all these things. Him and my mum, we'd got all these travel plans that she's had to do with her sister now, because he wasn't here to do it. He didn't get that opportunity. So the combo of that and then my own accident is very much, okay, so we need to prioritise living. So that eats into time as well. So I'm still maintaining clients that I've had from right through the accident. Not all of them. Some of them have gone from reasons that have nothing to do with me or the accident, but their circumstances. But getting new clients is very difficult to do, because obviously, you know, a new client wants you to be there and be receptive. So saying, no, sorry, we can't do a meeting on a Wednesday because that's when I've got physio. You know what it was like as juggling diaries trying to get this set up. So that does impact what I can do in terms of new clients. And it's also given a slight pivot, not by design, but obviously I've now got a whole new understanding of neurotech that I never had before.
I thought that, like, should like play this to your advantage. Just be absolutely smashing the phones, calling those businesses.
I've not had to, Duncan,
patient.
to be honest. I've been, as I always say people should be, I've been fairly active on LinkedIn, and they've come to me to say, look, 20 odd years experience in marketing in MedTech, and you understand what it's like as a neuro patient. Is there an opportunity we can work together? And I've just had to be very honest with them to say, look, yes, I love what you're doing. It looks really interesting stuff, and I definitely want to get involved, but you need to understand what my availability is going to be, and that there are times that I'm not going to be able to do things as quickly as I like to do. I find it more difficult than they do, I think. But I think the fact that I'm honest with them up front, if that's not going to work for them, then we don't start work. But if they understand that from up front, then you don't feel quite so guilty when you have to say, sorry, can't do that meeting.
Yeah, you mentioned just I guess, the reflection of this period around living and focusing on living. But is there any other lessons or reflections from this period that you can share?
I think trying to be kind to yourself, which is definitely not me by nature, but recovery, whatever that is, doesn't need to be, a major physical injury, but giving yourself time for recovery is as important as smashing it on the hard days. And I think even from a business point of view, trying to keep going at it 24/7, you reach burnout and you're not as effective as a person. So giving yourself that time to step away from it doesn't mean that you're losing interest, you're not focused, you're not dedicated, but it makes you a better person when you come back to it. And so we've done things like with the rehab, treating it like a training program. So I do 6 weeks and then have a week off. Now, that week off, because I'm me, doesn't mean sitting around twiddling my thumbs. I've got a recumbent trike, because I obviously can't ride a bike, but I've got a recumbent trike. So those weeks off, I'll be taking that out with hubby and the dog and just trying to get some normal life. But equally for me, it's taken me, I reckon, a good 18 months to understand that I need to live life, not just do physio 24/7. Because we don't know where this is going to end up. That's the hardest part. This is not like an orthopedic, surgery. Had the hip replaced, you have it done. You know how many weeks you can't do anything. Then you know how many weeks you've got to do rehab. Then you know the point you're going to be back to doing what you want to do. But nerves don't work like that. So there is no guarantee where this is going to end. So if I do nothing but physio and still don't get that outcome, I've wasted the opportunities. So things like a trike, when that was originally suggested to me, was like, no way. I'm going to recover enough and I'm going to be back on 2 wheels. So we'll wait and we'll get back on 2 wheels. But I don't know that I am. So why waste the opportunity to be outdoors having fun with hubby and the dog? If it's got to be slightly different and it's 3 wheels instead of 2, does it really matter? Doesn't mean if that recovery did happen, I have to stay on a trike forever, but that way I'm enjoying stuff along the way. So I'm trying lots of new sports I've never done before, as well as trying to get back as much as I can to swimming and biking.
Yeah. And one of the topics we like to talk about on here is mental health and well-being. And you said when the accident happened, outwardly you were fine, but obviously internally you weren't feeling great. And now, nearly 2 years on, you can reflect on that. But actually, at the time, what were the thoughts? What were the feelings? And what were you actually doing to get yourself feeling better? Day 1, day 2, day 7, day 10, like in them earlier days. What was the strategy?
I think the feeling really was, Nathan, that life is over. Not that I ever had suicidal thoughts, but life as I knew it is over. It's not going to look like that, and I don't know what it looks like. I know what's important to me, but I don't know how I show that in this new world that I live in. And that took me a long time and a good few sessions with a great psychologist to be able to work out, okay, what are your values? How do we go about showing those today in a slightly different world? But I think from day one was, what can I do physically? Because at that point, everything was about trying to walk again, I think at that point I naively thought, if I work really hard for a couple of years, I'm going to get back to being the person I was before the accident. I now know that is never going to happen. I won't be the same. I'm not going to get back that same physicality that I had before. It will be a different physicality, and I will just do things adapted. Doesn't make it any less of a life. But at that point, I couldn't see that. I could only see we're going to get back to it if we do. So my hospital bed had TheraBands tied to it on the left-hand side. So it was my right clavicle I broke. So for 2 weeks, basically don't use that arm as much as you can. But my left arm still works. So there was literally TheraBands attached to be able to try and get movement in that arm. And then obviously physio starts surprisingly quickly, I think. It was probably within 2 weeks. that I started seeing the neurophysios. But at that point, the physio is, can we get you to sit upright without your blood pressure plummeting and causing us a problem? And if we can do that, can you actually hold yourself upright? And I could hold myself upright for 10 seconds and felt like, I've never run a marathon, but how I imagine it would feel if you've run a marathon. It was absolutely exhausting. And to this day, I still say to physios when they're getting me to do various things, why does this feel so hard? And yet you would have done it without batting an eyelid beforehand. So getting your head round all that. But I think equally, the really hard part for me was feeling like a burden to those around me because I can't do things for myself. And it's not just the physical side. I think this is really important. From a spinal cord injury point of view, we all instantly think about walking and mobility. But actually, a spinal cord injury affects every organ of your body below the injury. So for me, that is T12, so belly button. So that means it affects bladder, it affects bowel, it affects skin, it affects temperature. I'm fortunate because it's a fairly low-level injury. I don't get spasms, but those with higher get spasms. It affects breathing. So it's not just about mobility. And for me in the early days, it was all about mobility, and the rest of it was kind of incidental. But actually, as time's gone on, if you can't sort bladder and bowel, you can't leave a house. And my instant thought, even 2 years down the line when going anywhere, is where's the nearest loo going to be? How long have I got between doing those activities? Is that long enough? Can I manage that? Do I have to start and think about when I have a drink before I leave so that I'm okay while I'm there? So it makes a massive difference on life, and not just on my life, but on those around me. So hubby's life has been turned upside down because he's having to do a lot of things I used to do. Our relationship has had to change, and I was adamant I did not want him being a carer. The thought of that just horrified me. And again, it sounds silly to say when you're paralysed, but I'm fortunate that I can manage bladder and bowel myself. A lot of people that have got a higher injury can't do that. Somebody's got to do it for them. So do you want that to be a partner? Do you want that to be a carer? I didn't want either, and I was fortunate I didn't have to have it. But not everyone is that fortunate. So there's a lot more to it than just the mobility.
And you mentioned there was a couple of psychological appointments you had, and it was really helpful. But from a point of my life's over, it's not going to be the same, to accepting this new way of life, what actually is the time frame there?
I don't know if I'll ever 100% accept
I was
it.
going to ask that as well.
No, I think, and at the moment, I'm still making recovery from a rehab point of view. So that makes it really easy to keep going because things are changing. I would say the majority of what is changing is where I had little twitches of muscle in the early days, those muscles are getting stronger. Where I had no muscle activity, so pretty much from my knees down, there still is no activity. So I'm always going to need some sort of aids in terms of foot and ankle movement is not what it was before. But fortunately, glutes, hamstrings, quads are slowly getting stronger over time. So that puts me in a great place in terms of what I can do. But things just have to be done differently. Those early days, because I focused on this is not how life's going to look. So we don't need to worry about it. Let's not stress about how we do it now, because we're not always going to do it like this. And I remember the first time I saw the psychologist saying to them, I'm kind of all right now, but I think the point at which it's not going to get any better, I'm going to fall off a cliff. But obviously that was 2 years ago. So over time, you do kind of accept a lot of it almost by osmosis. So I don't think now the point at which it's not going to get any better, I'm going to fall off a cliff as such. But I definitely have days, you go through phases with rehab that you make significant progress. I might have gone from a four-wheeled walker to crutches, and you're like, yeah, we're on the road. This is going to be fine. 12 months later, still using the crutches. I'm never going to get rid of these crutches. And while it's great to move from a walker to crutches, crutches tie your hands up completely. So
Yeah.
I can't walk with crutches and make myself a sandwich and carry the sandwich to sit down. I've either got to eat the sandwich where I've made it, or I've got to use a wheelchair just to be able to move that sandwich. So it's great in one respect, but not in others. And so I genuinely think, if I'm honest with myself, a wheelchair will always play a part of life somewhere, whether that is just it's easier to be able to do things this way, it gives me energy then to do the things I want to do, or whether it is just the days that you were so exhausted. Let's not try and kill ourselves and then end up having a fall because you're trying to push it too far.
And I think a lot of the things you've said, particularly in the earlier time around the accident, it's action and what can you do physically to make yourself better, and it's what's the next thing I can improve on. But what, like, thinking about then and even now, what are the daily mental things that perhaps you didn't do before that you now do that's part of your daily routine, coping mechanisms, anything in there, any tools you use?
I think the mental side is the hardest. People see you do 9 hours of physio and think that's hard work, but it's the mentally getting yourself around it, and when things go wrong, because they always do for all of us, picking yourself up at that point and not getting dragged down into this is the way it's always going to be, it's never going to change. And I can still hear the psychologist in my head saying to me, is that fact or is that feeling? If that's fact, there's nothing you can do about it. You have to accept it. But if that's feeling, then we accept that that's a feeling. Doesn't mean it's a wrong feeling to have, but it doesn't mean it's going to be like that forever. And that's
true.
the big one for me. Is a lot of the times is, when things aren't going great, is that fact or is that feeling? And I think the other is a ex-colleague, and I would now say good friend of mine, had a biking accident a number of years ago, and he had a brain injury. He was given a less than 10% chance of surviving it. And when he finally left hospital 9 weeks later, they said, we think we can get you to 70% of where you were. How does that sound? And he said, not good enough. I'm telling you now, in a year, I'll run a marathon. And in 2 years, I will do an Ironman. Sorry, it gets me choked even now. And he did. He did Kona, 2 years to the day of his accident. But his words to me were, don't think about the big goal because it's too big.
Yeah.
1% every day. So even when you're having a really bad day and things have all gone pear-shaped, what's the 1% that is better today than it was yesterday? And if you can get 1% every day, that is what's going to get you to that long-term goal. And I suppose that's just another way of saying trust the process, don't focus on the outcome, focus on the process, follow the process, and the outcome will take care of itself.
Yeah, I think that the next question I was going to ask is, what advice would you give to people that are going through a turning point or a similar moment, but maybe the point you've just said might be that, I don't know, because I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing is, maybe again, it's another way of saying the same thing, but is focus on what you can change, not what you can't. So, I can't change the fact I can't walk, but I can focus on, can I do rehab to make muscles stronger that might get me there? And try not to stress about the stuff you can't change, because you can't change it. You can't do anything about it. So don't put energy wasted into things that aren't in your control. And that definitely goes for business and startups as much as it does for a rehab journey. Not easy to do, but...
Yeah, I was just going to say the 1% advice can be applied to pretty much everything. Like, don't focus on the big goal, just break it down and just try and make small improvements each day, and you blink and you'll get there. We say this all the time. We'll do a podcast and then something just lands and you go, yeah, I needed to hear that today, or that's the takeaway. We after the first 20 episodes, we did a reflection of like our favourite parts and favourite bits of advice. And I can imagine in the next 20, we'll come back to that fact or feeling, because again, it's so relatable and so simple.
Yeah, the simple things. So the only trouble is they're not easy to do, are they, Duncan?
Nope.
In the moment, I remember with the psychologist us having a big discussion around burden. When I say to her, I'm a burden to my husband, and she'd say, but is that fact? And I would say, it is fact. He's now having to do the washing, the laundry. He didn't do all that before. That's fact. And she's like, but does that make you a burden? It's the burden element that isn't fact, not that he's got an increased workload. So just reframing that in your mind. So even if you kind of think, but it is, it is fact that we're running out of money or whatever it is, but it's that, can you take a step back from that and look at that in a bit more detail as to where the issue actually lies? And then that's the bit you can control.
Yeah. I kind of hesitant to ask the next question because it's one that we always ask, but actually how you've just broken that down there of not focusing on the big goal, and actually it's just the progress towards improvement. But generally we talk about, like, where do you go from here personally and professionally? Like, is there a goal? I don't know, do you want to do John O'Groats to Land's End on a 3-wheeler? No, that's a good target, and I'd highly recommend it. But what is next for you?
Yeah, so I don't think I'm brave enough to do a 3-wheeler on the road. I got knocked off when I was at his eye level, so I'm not willing to risk that one. I'll stick to off-road with the 3-wheeler. So yeah, I mean, I obviously, as the person that I am, I thrive on challenges of some sort. So September last year, I did a sprint triathlon, which sounds amazing, but actually let me break it down for you. It took me 2 days, not 2 hours. I did, the swim was 600 metres in Marine Lake, and then literally had to get hauled out by my tri-mates, and then went home to rest. And then that afternoon went out and did the bike ride, which was off-road, perfectly flat, 7 miles. It took me 2 hours. And by the time I got back to the car, I could barely get in the car. I was so exhausted. And then we waited until the Sunday afternoon to do a 1 kilometre walk, which I had to do with husband. I did with my crutches, and I had to do that with my husband behind me with a wheelchair. And every couple of 100 metres had to stop, have a rest, do it again. So the challenge for this year, we did that to raise funds for Wings for Life, which is a charity that is looking into research for spinal cord injury cures. And we raised £5,500, so thank you to everyone who supported us for that. But the goal this year is to try and do the same distance, but see if we can do it all in 1 day, rather than have to split it over 2 days. So that's my kind of shorter term goals. But I think it's just more about exploring different things. So I haven't for about 10 years, but I used to ski. Can I try sit ski, see how that goes? And equally getting involved in sports I've never done. So I've done a little bit since the accident of CrossFit. My problem with the triathlon stuff is it always comes with a comparison. You can't help yourself. You always compare it. So much as we sit on a bike now, on the Zwift community and go, great, I've got a new FTP. I can now do 50 watts. And in hospital, I couldn't get that into double digits. Mm-hmm. But tie that up with pre-injury, I had an FTP of 157. And I can't stop myself from going, but we've got a long, long way to go. So doing new sports that don't come with any comparison at all is something that is good mentally to do.
Yeah, so, I think I spoke about that on a previous podcast recently, and it was just talking about generally as you get later in life, you should try new things, because otherwise you're constantly comparing yourself against performance. In a running's a great example. Cycling, you're always going to compare, like, regardless of injury or not, just aging. You're always going to compare. So try new things, meet new communities, and kind of remove the performance element of it. It's just trying something new for the joy of it. A lot of the time. So a question about the industry that you have worked in for your entire career, and actually now when you spoke about the kind of companies that are approaching you because of your experience, but because of the experience that you've had recently as well. Like talking about that space and the innovation, like what excites you most about the industry?
I think the ability to truly change people's lives. It's massive. The impact that we in medical devices can have on individuals. And it doesn't need to be something as catastrophic as a spinal cord injury. A hip replacement, a knee replacement, a fixed ankle in a 60-year-old has the impact that you've potentially got to have on patients' lives. And I think from the commercial side, we don't always see that. We might see what happens in an operating theatre if we work in that part of the business, but we don't see what happens to that patient in 12 months' time, in 24 months' time. The fact that they can go and play football with their grandkids because they've had an ankle fixed, that ability to change people's lives is massive. But I think what I would like to see more of is us focus on genuinely solving the needs, not jumping on the latest trend because everyone is doing a particular thing. So as a big corporate organisation, we've got a gap in our portfolio now. We don't have one of those, so we need to have one as well. And then we end up with 12 of what we've already got. But actually, where's the difficult problems that we can't solve? And how do we get involved in trying to solve those is definitely what I'd like to see more of us doing, and getting the input from people, be it that use the equipment or the patients as the end users. As a typical example from a piece of kit that I use in rehab, and it's got a harness to it which straps. It's supposed to strap across the top of your hips. But I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. Because it was designed by men, it's straight because it's supposed to fit a male body. Females aren't shaped like that. So the moment you then take any weight off the individual with it, the whole thing rides up. Because we're not shaped like that. So talk to the users, talk to the patients to get that feedback in an early day. Get it as early as you can, and it really does change their process, because you're not then making something that isn't quite fit for purpose. But getting that input is so important, and anyone that is developing anything that they think I might be able to help with, I would love to give them that input to make sure that we get what is right for people.
Brilliant.
And before we go, if you had to leave our listeners with one final lesson from your life, what would you say?
I think it's back, Nathan, to that focus on what you can change, not what you can't.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I'd love to say a big thank you for joining us today, for being open and honest about, a lot of the time on this podcast, we're talking about things that have happened in the past. You're very much still going through it, and there's a long way to go. So we appreciate your openness to this. And for any of our...
Just going to say that I think it's a testament to how you are handling it, that within 2 years of it happening and still dealing with it, you're able to come onto a podcast and share so openly, because it will benefit others. But I think that's a marker for the progress you're making.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
And for any of our listeners that have watched this podcast and you've got your own turning point, pivotal moment in your life that you'd like to come on and discuss, please reach out to either Duncan and I. And like and subscribe to all the usual channels, YouTube, Spotify. Anything else, Dunks?
Apple?
That's it. Apple. Apple as well. And we'll see you next week for another episode of Beyond the Device.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.